Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the next episode of the In Production podcast. Today we're meeting amazing Brian. Please tell us more about yourself and why should people listen?
Yeah, well, I'm excited to talk about AI today. Thanks for having me. I have been coding or somehow involved in the realization of code 40 years now. And really, since last December in 25, I haven't written a line of code because the
hmm
world has changed. I think that's exciting for us at the moment. So I think how we bring code to market fundamentally different, and things that we're doing today are at the front of where those things are going with the enterprises that we're working with, and we're really getting agents and coding into production, not just beta and proof of concepts. These things are going live, and so I think there's
hmm
you know
It's amazing. And we will be covering your consulting side of work and career later down the episode. But I would love to start with your edtech company that you have founded, and then you jump into the consulting. What was the main learning that you can get in the company doing business and implementing it that you can never really learn in the consulting? Was there anything that was like your asset that you grabbed while your time building the business in terms of AI that you would never really get into in the consulting in your current position?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think one thing as a co-founder, and that's the second or third company that I've co-founded. And so
hmm
these themes kind of run through, but you begin to look at things, I think, a little more through a vision of ROI and EBITDA. And if I finish this project, what is this going to mean to the exit value of this company? What does it mean to how we staff, hire, and work with
hmm
people if this thing comes to fruition or it works? And so some of those, second level metrics of things that possibly when you're consulting, you're spending your time trying to, of course, advise on how to do the right thing, always usually probably thinking about ROI, but maybe not as much about how much value this adds to, in my exit criteria. If I own this technology and it's really functioning like it is it going to really do these things for the valuation of this company that I really
hmm
want it when it's done? I think those are hard things to grasp sometimes when you're consulting. And then also just the constraint of resources when you're founding a company or trying to do a startup and bring it to market. Some of the ingenuity and creativity is because you don't have the money. And
hmm
so you spend a lot of time thinking of these ways to change how you accomplish the same thing, but for half the cost or a quarter of the cost or less.
hmm
And how do I
hmm
do that in days or weeks, but not months or years? Because you don't have months or years. And so compressing these timeframes. And I think one of the biggest challenges to consulting is understanding that these entities are different. And
hmm
so for me, into it that way, they need longer time frames. They're not going to move at the same pace. And so I think it's been two ways, right? I'm learning some new things, and I'm bringing some things that I've learned that help out.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's always interesting to see when you don't have a certain resource how you turn curiosity or boldness or audacity into being that kind of resource that will help you maybe even compensate instead of having the deep pockets. By the way, I was reading the news that the team that you're currently with Marlabs, just became one of that Anthropic's first Cloud Partner Network members. That you were at the Partner Summit. I would love to use this opportunity to kind of uh, pick your brain or just see what you've heard when you're talking with people that are building those frontier models. What are the conversations behind the closed doors that enterprise clients that businesses don't usually hear of?
Yeah, that was an amazing opportunity. I think one of the things I took away the most is that this company, Anthropic, is growing so fast, and
hmm
it's such a crazy pace that it seems like it's even giving them some growth pain. Everything is about speed, right? It's more of a get really close, but we have to be really fast.
hmm
And I think that causes a certain number of challenges, but just the pace at which they are moving things forward at the scale that they're at, it is really just, on some level terrifying, right? There's showing cases where they're on X and they're saying, look, we see someone recommend a feature on X, and a few hours later, that feature is live in the product and it exists. And Claude Code is doing the coding for them. And so they're fully committed to the idea that Claude Code is writing their code. And
hmm
everyone's going to do it that way, and that this flywheel is just happening, and that all these things around the model, like you
Hmm.
just said, we think about them as a frontier model company, but I think one of the insights I got was like that's part of it, but that may not even be the main part of it anymore.
Hmm.
This infrastructure around that model has so much more focus and attention of what they need to do, way more than what I was giving it credit for, or the way I was thinking it through. These extra tools they're building, and of course, they let us see some demos tools that aren't even out yet that are coming down
Hmm.
the road. And those tools, you can just see that all the infrastructure and tooling around these models is just growing so fast and taking up so much time and energy. And then also, because they're using their own tools to do all their work to build their tools, it's just a flywheel effect. It just
It is.
builds, it's just building on itself. And you get to really see those demos and hear from the people who are working on those things firsthand. And the pace was just amazing.
It's very cool. Would you recommend to the people that are listening that are technical or who want to become technical? Because I mean, you're at the stage of the career where you don't have to code, right? But you still do it. Like even though you're not, as you mentioned, you're not since December, you're not writing a line of code because AI does it. But still, you're vibe coding. You are you have the good understanding. You are building different POCs to support sales. I mean, within your team, within the teams of your clients. I mean, that's really unusual. Would you? What is the benefit that you have at this stage of the career when you're still hands-on on everything? What's the benefit of doing it? And would you recommend folks that want to do it, where should they start?
It's going to be unavoidable that everyone needs to embrace it on some level every day. They may not be writing code every day, but the amount of productivity that you can increase no matter what your business line is, no matter what your function is day to day, is just getting exponentially out of control.
Hmm.
So like last night, for example, I'm sitting on the couch with my dog. I'm watching a show. I'm watching actually YouTube, and the new model is out, right? Gemma 4. And I'm like, that looks fascinating. And so what do? I pick up my phone.
Hmm.
It's connected to Claude Code Dispatch, right? Claude
Hmm.
Dispatch, right? So I just on my phone, I ask it to install that
Hmm.
remotely on my machine upstairs, and we go through a little bit of a process. I just keep watching, and I've got that up and running and ready to test. And I'm using it to test new features in an application that I was working on today. But I did that from my couch. Like I would have had to
Hmm.
go sit somewhere and do that work before in a way that would have taken a lot more time. And now I just delegate that work, and it actually works. It comes back working. And for people who aren't writing code, they're able now to have the accessibility to create new tools that can even be throwaway tools. Like you can use some of these tools one time to maybe map data from A to B just to do something for you, or write hooks to Slack that automatically let people create tickets from Slack and into Jira
Hmm.
automatically for them, and just queue up these processes and just start removing friction across the board in ways that they know in their domain, but
Hmm.
I might not know from where I sit as a developer. Putting these tools in their hands, right, is just enabling them to create all these efficiencies that they really was not available to them before. They would have had to put in a queue somewhere, wait for someone to do this work, and maybe get back to them later, or it would just be cost prohibitive. It just would be impossible. You just wouldn't do it at all. And so I think on some level, getting into these tools doesn't necessarily always mean writing a full application code. It doesn't mean you got to be making um, a new mobile app. But people are using these
Hmm.
tools as ways to automate their marketing efforts, to work on
Yeah.
different content. All these things are coming to fruition, and it takes that like light bulb moment where you realize how that productivity is going to switch over. And then the flywheel just goes, and you just start realizing all these things that you can do that were just never possible before.
Yeah, it's very cool when you. A lot of people are being stopped at the personal level in implementing this thing because they just simply they don't know that they can do those. And for them, my simplest advice is just go to Claude and start the chat, and then ask it and explain it what you do, or maybe just use your history of for things that you've been googling with them. It already knows a lot about you, so just ask them, "Hey, I'm doing this and this. This is my project. It's my priorities. Like, how can I make my life easier?" Today, I learned about like code. Scheduled task in Cowork that it can perform something, and I'm like, damn, wow, this is amazing. Like, how can I do it? But this is all nice, like on the personal level. I'm curious about company-wide initiatives. Whenever teams are launching AI pilots, you've seen a few of them, a bunch of them. And most of them, like at least from what I see from market, it's very hard to run a successful AI pilot that then will be scaled to the whole organization. So, in your experience, if you talk to someone and you see that the pilot failed, what is the single most common reason that it failed? What are the things that folks are just not noticing in the early stages?
Yeah. It is quite a few things, quite frankly. So our projects, by the way, the ones that I'm working on, we're going live. So these things go live. It's just that they're all not always the same project that they originally had wanted, or it's not approaching it quite the same way they'd wanted to approach it. So I think there's a few things that stop some of these from going live. One
Hmm.
is I think everybody thinks it's free. And then they find out there's a bill, and then there's a bill to scale it. And so some of those economics haven't really been thought out up front. Like they thought they were going to do a POC. They thought it might be cheap. It was hard to figure out how much it might cost. And then you look at it and you go, well, this is actually more expensive than what we used to do. Like this is not
Hmm.
worthwhile now. So
Hmm.
that definitely happens. I think people get in and find out that the data that they needed to feed these applications just isn't in the state it needs to be. And they don't realize how much the human was actually, overcoming these problems. And so this human was sitting there like toiling through this bad data or this not quite perfect data. And the AI, it just ends up making mistakes or delivering poorly. And there's too much expectation that this AI is somehow magically overcoming your bad data.
Hmm.
And that just spoils a lot of projects, obviously, right? It just goes downhill from there. So, we try to talk to
100%.
like your data just has to be reliable for making these decisions, or you have to build into your process. And so, one more thing I think people really don't ever do is realize how many errors the humans were making, right? So the AI makes errors, the human makes errors. And everybody keeps like approaching this like the AI is a calculator. It's not a calculator. It's like a mini human with a college degree that hasn't done anything yet and can make a lot of mistakes. And so
It's
enterprises have process in place to deal with these error rates. But somehow they think when they use AI, they just can throw that away and it'll just be perfect. Like this whole
Yeah, yeah.
paradigm,
They hope for the magic box.
they hope for the magic bullet. It's like that's not going to work. And if the error rate on the AI is 5%, but the human was 10 and it was cheaper, like that's an improvement. You did good. Put in a process to deal with the 5% and move forward. And I think they just really struggle with the idea that the AI is not a calculator and that it makes mistakes, and that's okay.
Well, that's a lot of failing hopes, and it becomes especially like in my day to day, in my experience, because we work with the highly regulated industries, and you work the same. You work with with healthcare claims, with financial services, infrastructure, with manufacturing, with government. In your experience, which industry has the biggest gap between executives are overexcited? They're like, "Oh yeah, we're so pumped. We need to have this thing like yesterday," but they actually do not realize that their data or infrastructure or like that their homework is not done. Yes, the promise is there for the AI, and AI is like can be really revolutionary for their business. But the gap between where they think they are and where they should be is too big. So, in your experience, which industry? Maybe it's not even one of those four that I mentioned to you. What is the industry where it's like the hardest way to get AI to the level where it needs to be? So leadership just simply don't think about it.
No, well, two things I think are challenging in some of these industries, but like the finance sector, we work with some large financial institutions and they were cutting edge with machine learning before there was AI. And so they're kind of funded and ready to go. Like they know what they're into it. It's important to their business. And when you shift to like manufacturing, the margins are such that these look like large enough expenditures,
Uh-huh.
that it gets really challenging to figure out how to move forward. So that's kind of like a different problem on sort of like, how can I fund this? How impactful is it really going to be? And much more slow to adopt, looking for solutions that are canned or proven, right? But then I think to answer your question, the biggest opportunity is really in healthcare. Like if you really look at what can be done with AI in healthcare, it's massive what can be done, but the resistance to it is majorly high, right? It's
Hmm.
just overwhelming, and part of it's regulation, part of its lives are at risk, right? We get that, but the opportunity to improve healthcare, improve lives, have AI have an extremely positive impact on outcomes.
Hmm.
is just on such a high level on a system that, has an opportunity for these extra costs to really be taken out of it. I do think over time we're going to see massive improvements there. But, if you were starting today and trying to do something and you were trying to get into that industry, especially with a startup or consulting or something, these are, really challenging environments that are adverse to the change, even if individual doctors maybe, or individual administrators want to help advocate these changes. As an organization, the organization is built to resist that change
Hmm.
and sort of defend the status quo and the patient's safety. And we get that. But on some level, we have to work to push these things forward and help. And so maybe you have to start at an administrative level. How do we improve the paperwork part of this process in a way that helps with the administration side so that the system can still free up cash flow to maybe invest and try things in different areas? How do we do pilots in a way that helps with that risk aversion, but still can move things forward? And, it's just a very different environment that I think is extremely challenging, but has so many opportunities.
I'm curious here. So, do you think that in this industry, so or within in these environments, will this change and this slow adaptation towards AI? Will it come from new teams from the market, like from startups like ours, or will it be something that the company will ship, test, and deploy internally?
That's amazing. I get a lot of customers or prospects right now that we're talking to that are really expecting us to come to them with an actual solution. So I
Like,
think
like the one day that you can build it for them, or when you come
not
in
that
and
you
you
can
say,
build it, but
buy
like
this, 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 and it's gonna work.
exactly. Like you've either prepackaged these things you would buy, or you have already started to build this thing that would nearly be done for them. And you know how to do this part of their business as well as they do. And you've already thought about this solution and you're down the road on it. And so I think these companies that have this vertical knowledge, they are going to be able to work into companies and succeed. On the flip side, I think companies that have their own proprietary data that no one else has, they're going to have to in some way. They're going to be developing their own solutions and they're going to be extremely successful long term. Like I work with a company that does have its own data. We helped AI enable some of this
Hmm.
data. And with 7 or 8 days of demos, they sold 800,000 in new revenue.
Nice.
It's explosive. Like that changes a small company and how they work and how they go to
It is.
market. But
Yeah.
if you didn't have this proprietary piece, right, no one else could sell them a canned solution because no one has the data and the thing they have. So they had to
Hmm.
bring it to market. And when they did, it's a very good status for them. I think this is sort of going to be the challenge. It's which things should my company buy and which things should they build? And I just think that equation has changed. I think that dynamic has always been there. We've always talked about that for the last 30 years. And we had shifted, I think, a long way towards SaaS and buying.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think with the ability of Claude Code to really just recreate these very specific solutions to your industry, I think some of that
Just do it.
will
Yeah.
will shift back over time. But I don't think, I'm not a SaaS doomer or anything. I don't think that the
Hmm.
big banks are leaving Salesforce anytime soon. Like they're there.
Yeah. Me
But you
neither.
got to pick which ones. And I think that dynamic is changing dramatically towards doing it in house again
Okay.
and being able to.
A follow-up question here. So it still doesn't matter. Like the problem is going to be the same whether the company decides to build something on their own or they decide to buy somebody. But whenever you mentioned it already, like whenever you dig into the process, there is the process, and then there is the way that humans are actually doing the work. And sometimes those are two false friends. What did you learn about how humans actually do the work? How do they do exceptions? How do they find creatively workarounds? How do they create those workarounds? What is your experience around that?
On some level, right, it's frightening how little the business knows how the business operates sometimes,
Hmm.
right? It's fascinating. I think we've seen some workforces where, let's say, you have a few hundred people doing a job that's done by humans. There is, like you said, this sort of documentation that is out of date. Like you can't look at the
Hmm.
documentation and get the answer. And if you talk to the human, they'll say, well, this data really means like this. For this exit criteria to be exist properly the right way, you actually do it this way, even though normally you would do it that way. And so the happy path is kind of where the corporate documentation tends to be. And then
Hmm.
it's sort of like these exception cases, which are completely undocumented. We're going to automate that. That needs to actually work over time, right? Like we actually need to know what those are. I think that represents a huge challenge when you have just masses of people who sort of the humans are learning over time from other people or experience. They're making some failures. They're learning to do it their own way.
The
But you can't
tribal
necessarily
knowledge. We
exactly tribal, and they're not going to turn that back into some document, somewhere. So we've actually implemented some projects where the AI is basically watching the logs of what the humans are doing, and then we record that and we go through with the AI machine learning to say, hey, in the future, maybe this should be something, a piece of knowledge that we've learned now that we know this exists. And then the system can actually apply that quote unquote, let's call it an edit for the moment, in a future iteration, and then still put it in front of a human. The human's always in the loop in these places, but they'll put it back in front of the human and it'll just already be edited. And it says, hey, this is why we edit it, kind of thing. And now the
Mhm.
the human, that human may not have ever learned that lesson yet, they're getting the edit and they can choose to accept it or not. But these types of things we've really had to think through, sort of surprising. We sort of thought some of these things, would be well documented. But even if they are well documented, the tribal knowledge is really high and it's hard to
Yeah.
learn.
I can tell you a story later about the company that is building this way to observe what the employees are doing and then build the map out of it. But I'm also curious about the companies, I mean market companies that ran a successful AI pilot. What's usually the biggest blocker then? So, for example, the company did the pilot, everybody's happy, it's successful. It proved what it had to prove. What is usually the moment where the whole program goes into the garbage? Or is there anything that, or like generally, if the AI pilot is proved the program to be working, it's going to be implemented like 100% of times.
No, no, no. I think if we get tripped up, it's always like we'll do a POC and that's great. The POC shows that this would work, but then there's some
Hmm.
sort of security check, regulation review. Can we use that data? Is there bias? Is this allowed? These types of things that can put sort of some larger delays into things. But I think
Hmm.
if the POC is successful, right? People try to move to rollout. And I think those rollouts take longer than people expect is the challenge, but like we're getting through that process. But what type of infrastructure is actually needed to go live? It's much like when we were kind of rolling out .com and everyone thought .com was free and it's just some web server somewhere and they're like, why is this bill so big? It's like, no, no, there's like servers and they have to do different things and there's a whole deployment pipeline that has to be built that makes this work. And it's just, I think that effort to deploy is a lot longer than people expect. And you have to be prepared to go through all those hurdles, right? Everybody wants to release something secure. So we got to make sure we go through the security review. Everybody wants
Hmm.
it to scale. So how are we going to do a limited pilot? And then there's going to be problems. And so like things get stopped at a whole bunch of blocks. Like the first time a person gets an answer, probably
Hmm.
an executive they didn't think should have been answered that way. It's like, do we freeze everything? Do we turn it off? Or do we work through why that wasn't accurate? How do we fix it
Hmm.
and make this fast? Right? It has to turn around fast, but it has to be accurate again. And can we do that? Can we respond in that way? But I think those things slow, at least for us, our customers down, but haven't
Hmm.
stopped us from going live, which is
Okay.
which is good. But I could see how you could easily get tripped up and just decide, to give up.
So it's very interesting, and I'll by the end of the episode, I left the interesting question for the dessert, so listeners and viewers they can leave with a very interesting insight. You mentioned in the beginning that you have been actively coding and building for essentially like 40 years. That's a lot of time, and in that time, you've seen a bunch of hype cycles, and those hype cycles they come and then they dissolve, they disappear. Within, like the hype is not usually it's not built from nothing. Especially right now in AI, there is a lot of hype, there is a lot of noise, but it's because there is also a lot of signal in what's happening, how the world is changing. So I'm curious in your experience working within the hype cycles and then digesting what is signal and what is not signal. Because, for example, the company can implement the AI in the sense of, oh, it just summarizes me my morning emails. That's nice, but it's not the experience like you mentioned about that company where you implemented AI and they made like K in an explosion in terms of sales. That means that the company was changed by AI. So how do you understand from news or just from any other indicators that the company is actually implementing AI and AI is going to change this company? It's not just like to sprinkle on top and say, oh, we're AI.
First, anything someone puts out in the news, I assume is a lie. I just start there. So
Okay.
everything in that regard, I'll just it is why I have to stay hands on. It's why I had to get Gemma 4 installed last night and try to run OCR examples on it this morning. Can you really do that on a Mac Mini? Turns out you can. Wow. Okay. Pretty good.
Hmm.
But I need to know that it's real. And when I look at the companies and what they put out, you can see that a lot of them are putting out information that say, we're doing AI, we've implemented this very well, but it can't quite be at the level they're saying, right? Like it has to be some height because if it were at the level they're saying, you would see it in the financials in a quarter, right? You might not see it right away. And I get that a lot of stuff is new, but you would start to see, these increases in gross margin. You would start to see these companies talk about these massive productivity gains that would either come in new sales, like the company we just talked about. We exploded the sales growth
Hmm.
and that would show up in the financials, or we saved a whole bunch of money in cost and that would show up in the financials. And so I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of investment being made, a lot of people still rolling things out partially, but we haven't quite figured out how to optimize what we're doing. And I don't think it's that much different than when the internet came out, right? When the
Hmm.
internet came out,
Hmm.
everybody sort of like put up a website and they put up a store and they tried to do some things and some of them worked and right, some of them didn't. And we did, reverse logistics bidding and all these things to try to understand like which thing is going to work for my business. And so I
Hmm.
still think in this part of the hype cycle, that's where we're at. These companies with all these announcements, they have a whole bunch of people. And if you can imagine them just like running all over the place. And so now they're running all over the place really fast. It's not like we're going somewhere. That vision hasn't sort of coalesced to where 10% productivity in every employee we have turns into 10% productivity for the company yet, because
Hmm.
it's just too scattered, too not focused just yet. But that will come with time. As everybody sort of gets used to the tool and starts to go sort of in the same corporate direction, as they sort of start to understand, how do I bring these things to market in a way that what person A is doing and person B is doing isn't conflicting anymore. Like
Hmm.
it's building on each other. I think we're going to see those flywheels start to happen. And then you're going to see the news, but you're going to see it in the financials. You're going to see it when they do their quarterly announcement. You're going to see, the productivity, or you're not, right? It didn't work, but most likely it's going to go up once these individuals get aligned. Like we're just seeing individuals hit these individual flywheels of productivity where they're just pumping out so much more than they could ever do, right? People having like AI log into Jira and bring all their tickets together and start to format them in ways that are ready for coders in different ways that would have taken them hours and hours of going through all these submissions, and AI prepping all that work so they can put it out the next day. Weeks of work being done overnight. And that doesn't change the rest of the company's delivery cycle yet, but as it hits the rest of the company, it will.
Wow, this is amazing. It was a great conversation, and thank you so much for sharing the best of the best insights from your day to day with us and with the viewers. I'm sure you're gonna have a few questions coming from the audience, so I'm gonna leave your contact. If folks want to reach out or they're gonna be interested in the case that you described with that explosive revenue, it's gonna be a very interesting chat for you.
Yeah, and I'm happy to follow up and have conversations. And I'm glad that we had the opportunity to talk today. I really appreciate it.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And thank you so much, dear listeners and viewers, for attending.